Cooking. Some of us may often even have to cook. But do you know the history of cooking? Let's listen together. Check. It. Dot. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Senang Senang, where this channel discusses lifestyle, fashion, healthy sports, and a person's activities both indoors and outdoors. Disclaimer: in what was made, there was no intention to harass or demean anyone. This video is completely taken from a legal live streaming application platform and of course has terms and conditions. Not to live carelessly, including nudity, violence, smoking, and anything that is prohibited as prohibited by the YouTube platform itself. Video uploaded by Senang Senang, purely from editing with its own narrative to increase our insight and intelligence in thinking. Enjoy for watching.
History of cooking.
The following document is a chronological frame of events throughout history that have a direct or indirect influence on food, wine, and related topics. It is by no means the be-all and end-all, and in no way pretends to represent every event. It is continually being updated as the author uncovers new facts, figures, and subjects of relevance. Every effort has been made to cross-reference, but I am only human, and a mistake may have occurred. Cooking is the art and science of preparing food for eating by the application of heat. The term also includes the full range of culinary techniques: preparing raw and cooked foods for the table, final dressing of meats, fish, and fowl, cleaning and cutting fruits and vegetables, preparing salads, garnishing dishes, decorating desserts, and planning meals. Earliest types of cooking. The origins of cooking are obscure. Primitive humans may first have savored roast meat by chance, when the flesh of a beast killed in a forest fire was found to be more palatable and easier to chew and digest than the customary raw meat. They probably did not deliberately cook food, though, until long after they had learned to use fire for light and warmth. It has been speculated that Peking man roasted meats, but no clear evidence supports the theory. From whenever it began, however, roasting spitted meats over fires remained virtually the sole culinary technique until the Paleolithic period, when the Aurignacian people of southern France began to steam their food over hot embers by wrapping it in wet leaves. Aside from such crude procedures as toasting wild grains on flat rocks and using shells, skulls, or hollowed stones to heat liquids, no further culinary advances were made until the introduction of pottery during the Neolithic period. The earliest compound dish was a crude paste, the prototype of the pulmentum of the Roman legions and the polenta of later Italians, made by mixing water with the cracked kernels of wild grasses. This paste, toasted to crustiness when dropped on a hot stone, made the first bread. Advances in cooking techniques. Culinary techniques improved with the introduction of earthenware, and, more or less concomitantly, the development of settled communities, the domestication of livestock, and the cultivation of edible plants. A more dependable supply of foodstuffs, including milk and its derivatives, was now assured. The roasting spit was augmented by a variety of fired clay vessels, and the cooking techniques of boiling, stewing, braising, and perhaps even incipient forms of pickling, frying, and oven baking were added. Early cooks probably had already learned to preserve meats and fish by smoking, salting, air drying, or chilling. New utensils made it possible to prepare these foods in new ways, and such dishes as bacalhau a la Vizcaína, dried cod, and fin and haddie, smoked haddock, are still eaten. BC. The cultivation of soybeans in China predates recorded history and spread from there to other countries in Eastern Asia before the modern period. So essential was the soybean to Chinese civilization that it was considered one of the 5 sacred grains, the others being rice, barley, wheat, and millet. The popularity of soybeans in the Orient was due to their wide use as a food. 11,000 BC, flint-edged wooden sickles are used to gather wild grains. Bronze Age lentils from this period have been discovered at a settlement site found near Lake Biel in Switzerland. Almonds dating from this period have been found on the island of Crete. 9,000 BC, plant cultivation begins in the Fertile Crescent region of the Middle East. Sheep are domesticated in the Middle East. 7,000 BC, Mesoamerican, what is now Mexico and Central America. Peoples begin domesticating plants, gourds, peppers, avocados, and a grain, amaranth. CT 500 BC. Evidence suggests that peas were grown in Turkey. 6,000 BC. Cattle are domesticated about this time. 5,000 BC. The Egyptians begin irrigating crops. Sumerians using the herbs thyme and laurel as medicine. Dates cultivated in the Middle East. Evidence of avocado use in Mexico. 1000 BC. Egyptians using yeast as a leavening agent. 500 BC. Bread making probably originates in Egypt about this time. Sumerians using wild mushrooms as a food. Olives known to have been grown on the island of Crete. 3000 BC, farmers of Mesopotamia were growing crops of turnips, onions, broad beans, peas, lentils, leeks, radishes, and maybe garlic. Probably breeding ducks at this time. The Chinese emperor, Sung Lung-Si, discovers the medicinal properties of herbs. Turkey from this era have been found in American Indian refuse sites. 37 BC. The origins of tea culture and the brewing of dried tea leaves into a beverage are obscure. Experts believe, however, that the tea plant originated in a region encompassing Tibet, western China, and northern India. According to ancient Chinese legend, the Emperor Shennong, learned how to brew the beverage in 2737 BC when a few leaves from the plant accidentally fell into water he was boiling. 700 BC. The Chinese had a herbal listing 365 plants. 2500 BC, corn, maize, is domesticated in Mesoamerica. 2000 BC. Water treatment knowledge dates from 2000 BC, when Sanskrit writings indicate that methods for purification of foul water consisted of boiling in copper vessels, exposing to sunlight, filtering through charcoal, and cooling in earthen vessels. Onions mentioned as a food source by Sumerian scribes. 1500 BC. Coriander being used as a culinary herb in Egypt. 1450 BC Egyptians using cinnamon as a spice. 1100 BC, Chinese making soy sauce. 1000 BC, the Incas were freezing potatoes in the snow for preservation. Geese known to have been popular in Germany. Chinese thought to be producing a type of alcohol spirit from rice. 800 BC, cultivated tomatoes used in Mexico. 700 BC, aubergines being cultivated in China. 600 BC, Assyrian king. Sardanapalus, said to have introduced the first cooking competition with the prize of thousands of gold pieces. 100 BC, sugarcane cultivated in India and bananas. 206 BC, flour milling introduced into China during the Han era, thus allowing the onset of Chinese noodle making. 200 BC, the vending machine was probably invented about 200 BC, when Hero of Alexandria described a coin-operated device designed to vend holy water in an Egyptian temple. 5 BC, palm sugar being used by the Chinese. Woks being used in China. Tofu being used in China. Broccoli being cultivated in Europe. Pepper, corns, introduced to Java by Hindu settlers and into Europe by Arab traders. 4 BC, Archestratus, a Greek, wrote the first cookbook, Hedipathia, Pleasant Living, in the 4th century BC. As early as the 4th century BC, the Chinese had codified the 5 basic taste sensations: sweet, sour, briny, spicy, and bitter. Around these elementary sensations, they built a cuisine of subtlety, variety, and sophistication. 3 BC. Athenaeus described the well-equipped Greek kitchen, which included such sophisticated utensils as a specially constructed dish in which the eggs of peacocks, geese, and chickens could be boiled together in graduated concavities. Although the diets of peoples of the ancient world are well documented, little is known about their cooking techniques. In the Sumerian capital of Ur, street vendors hawked fried fish and grilled meats to passers-by. In Egypt, small raw birds were pickled in brine and eaten cold in the 3rd millennium BC, but excavations from the same period indicate that more sophisticated cooking methods were in use, and that the rich particularly liked elaborate stews. Leavened bread seems to have first appeared in Egypt, although the time and place are uncertain. 1000 AD. Maybe the most famous of all meals is served and partaken of, the Last Supper of Christ. Oranges appear in India in the 1st century AD from China, 25 to 200 AD. One of the first applications of metals was to build a stove. Cast iron was used for this purpose in China, through a process in which melted iron was poured into sand molds. 97 AD. The most notable ancient water supply and waste disposal systems were those of Rome. In AD 97, Sextus Julius Frontinus, then water commissioner of Rome, reported the existence of 9 aqueducts of lengths varying from 16 to more than 80 kilometers, 10 to 50 milnos, with cross-sections of 0.5 to 4.5 SQM, 7 to 50 SQFT. Such a system had an estimated aggregate capacity of 84 million gallons per day. In addition to this system, Rome had a great sewer known as the Cloaca Maxima, which drained the Roman Forum, and which is still in service 1st century AD. Roman Emperor Trajan created a guild for bakers, 3rd century AD. Mary or Marianne, an alchemist of Alexandria, lived. She is credited with the discovery of the properties of the Bain Marie, from whom the name is derived, Mary's bath. 6th century AD, 529 Saint Benedict, founds the Benedictine order and builds an abbey at Monte Cassino, Italy, 575. The coffee Arabica first thought to be cultivated about this time. 7th century AD. The patron saints of cooks lived in this century. Fortunat, a famous poet and bishop of Poitiers, is the patron saint of male cooks and Radegonde, the patron saint of female cooks, founded a monastery that Fortunat became chaplain of 600. Windmills are in use in Persia for irrigation. 15th century. Europe began to use cast iron stoves several hundred years after the Chinese. Haricots beans, introduced into Europe from South America. In the middle of the 15th century, chilies are being grown and used in Europe after being introduced from the Americas. Aubergines introduced into Europe. Christopher Columbus mentions the virtue of allspice in his journals in the latter years of this century. 1404. The word brioche first appears in use, though the actual product's history no doubt precedes this. 1411. Production of the spirit Armagnac recorded. 1416. The French Butchers' Guild that had reigned supreme for centuries was dissolved by royal decree. They lost all their privileges and their shops destroyed. 431 caviar is first mentioned as an hors d'oeuvres in Rabelais' work, Pantagruel. It was not to become famous in France for another 500 years. 1475. An edict is granted to allow the selling of prepared pork dishes, sausages, pâtés, etc. The start of what we now know as the charcuterie and the masters of the profession charcutieres. The name is derived from the Old French, chair, flesh, and cuit, cooked, 1488. Portuguese vessels reached South Africa by 1488 for purpose of spice trading. 1489. Portuguese vessels reached Calicut in India by 1498 for purpose of spice trading. 1493. Christopher Columbus introduces sugarcane into Hispaniola, Haiti Dominion Republic. 1498. The toothbrush is invented by a Chinese dentist. 16th century. Celery cultivated from the wild and poisonous variety in Italy sometime in the 16th century. Kidney beans, and vanilla pods introduced into Europe from the Americas. Rice and limes introduced to Mexico by Spanish traders. Avocados discovered by the Spanish in Mexico. Cashew and peanuts were introduced into Europe by Portuguese traders from the Americas. Cauliflower is introduced to France from Italy in the middle of the 16th century, 1509. The first sugarcane mill is established in the Americas, 1513. Portuguese vessels reached Canton, China, by 1513 for purpose of spice trading. 1519. Chocolate is introduced into Spain as a beverage. The term chocolate was originally applied to a drink similar to today's hot chocolate. The Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, introduced the drink to Spain upon returning from his Mexican expedition, during which he was given some by the Aztec king Montezuma II. Gradually spreading from Spain through Europe and into England, the chocolate drink became increasingly popular. Catherine de' Medicis, born in Florence, Italy, April 13th. 1520 corn, Zea maize, is imported into Spain from the West Indies by Hernán Cortés and Christopher Columbus, 1524. The Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, introduces the cacao beans to Europe. 1533. Catherine de' Medicis arrived in France from Florence with a retinue of master chefs. She brought Italian staples, milk-fed veal, baby peas, artichokes, broccoli, and various pastas. The French court tasted, for the first time, such delicacies as quenelles, fish dumplings, zabalione, a rich egg yolk and wine custard, and scallopine. With her arrival, French cookery embarked on a course that produced the most complex and refined cuisine in the Western world. 1554. Tomatoes from South America are cultivated in Europe. 1550. The world's first cafe was opened in Constantinople. 1553. Calvados is mentioned in the diary of a gentleman of the Cotentin, Gilles de Gouberville. 1569. A strange law in France is passed, forbidding bakers to wear breeches other than on Sundays, which meant they could not go out in public without being immediately identified. This law was passed to force them to stay at the oven all day. They were also forbidden to gather in groups, carry a sword or any other weapon. So was the importance of the baker in those days. 1573. The potato is brought back from the Americas and cultivated in Spain. 1574. The Corporation of Pasta Makers is founded in Genoa, Italy. 1577. The Regolazione dell'arte dei maestri fidellari, rules for the Pasta Masters Art Corporation, were drawn up in Savona, Italy. 1586, July 28th. First potatoes arrive in England from Colombia, brought by Sir Thomas Harriot. 1589. Catherine de' Medicis died at Blois, 2 weeks after her husband, on January 5th. 17th century. In the 17th century, chocolate houses were the social meeting places of the day. First made in 17th century Holland, the manufacture and popularity of gin spread quickly throughout Europe, and variations of the Dutch formula began to appear. Gin is an alcoholic beverage made by distilling fermented mixtures of grains and flavoring the resulting alcohol with juniper berries. The name is derived from the French word genièvre, juniper. Jerusalem artichoke introduced to Europe from its native North America early this century. Parsley introduced to America by British colonists. Italy denounces coffee as Satan's brew. 1600, British merchants formed the East India Company, 1600-1858, and introduced teas into England and the American colonies, 1602. The Dutch East India Company is founded. The Massachusetts Bay colonists are introduced to clams by the native Indians. 1610. The first inn built in the original American colonies was the Jamestown Inn in Virginia, established about 1610. Lodging houses called inns or taverns in the north, and ordinaries in the south, were soon established near seaports, canals, river landings, and post roads. An 18th century Massachusetts law provided penalties for any town that did not offer lodging for travelers. The principle of vending did not emerge again after its first known mention in 200 BC until the 17th century, when coin-operated honor boxes holding tobacco were common in English taverns. 1615. Pierre-François de la Varenne, born, died in 1678. Author of Le Vrai Cuisinier, published in 1651. Anne of Austria introduces drinking chocolate to the French court. 1620. Wild turkeys found by the Pilgrims in the New World. 1627. Last known specimen of aurochs, ancient breed from where domestic cattle were bred, recorded in Poland. 1630. Louis de Béchamet born, he was a French financier, farmer general, and steward to the house of the Duke of Orléans. It is thought that bechamel sauce is named after him. 1634. Dijon in France granted the exclusive rights to make mustard. 1644. The drink, coffee, was introduced into Europe in the mid-17th century by a traveler named Leroy. 1647. A blast furnace at Saugus, Mass. was casting iron stoves. Many of these early stoves were jam stoves, which were intended to make a fireplace more efficient and distribute its heat more effectively. The most common was the 5-plate stove, made of 5 flat iron plates that formed a rectangular box with one open side. A hole was cut in the back of the fireplace completely through the wall to the room behind it, and the stove was inserted into the opening with the open end of the stove being flush against the rear wall of the fireplace. The remainder of the stove protruded into the room to be heated. When a fire was built in the stove, it served to heat both areas. Designers of these early stoves delighted in casting intricate designs into the visible portions. 1650. In English, spellings of coffee and coffee were established, the former becoming the single standard by 1651, Le Vrai Cuisinier, published, the first cookbook to summarize the French nobility's cooking practices. Written by Pierre-François de la Varenne. 1654. French writer Nicolas de Bonnefond publishes a work called Les Délices de la Campagne. It was to prove a turning point in French cuisine. The book was responsible in the French turning away from the practices from the Middle Ages of spice overuse and being concerned with the natural flavor of food. Tactor. American cultivated strawberries introduced to Europe from the New World. 38. Coffee introduced to the Americas. A 1669. The ambassador of the Turkish government. To Louis XIV, Soliman Aga popularizes coffee at the French court. 1670. Coriander, being cultivated for the first time in the USA in Massachusetts. 1672. At the Saint-Germain Fair in Paris, an Armenian gentleman named Pascal set up a stall selling coffee. His success, however, was fleeting as coffee was yet to become a sociably acceptable drink. By 1678, French botanist M. Marchand demonstrated that mushrooms grew from spawn, thus starting the cultivation of the vegetable. 1683. The cafe and coffee drinking is firmly established in Vienna, Austria, after the invading Turks left behind hundreds of sacks of beans. Given to the victor, Kolschitsky, it was he who created the now famous Vienna coffee. Around this time, the croissant was created in Vienna, Austria, in celebration of defeating the Turks. The shape mirrors the Turkish crescent symbol. 1689. The English, who had previously imported distilled liquors, began to encourage the domestic manufacture of spirits from English grain. And gin, which could be cheaply made and sold, rapidly became the solace and the scourge of the nation's poor. 1690s. Lloyd's Insurance takes its name from the late 17th century London coffee house of Edward Lloyd, where marine insurers met to do business. 1696. The first Parisian café was opened by an Italian, Café Procope. 18th century. Jean Nasion. A merchant from Dijon, France creates what is now known as Dijon mustard. In Naples, pasta was made by mixing the dough by foot. Ferdinando II, the King of Naples, unhappy with this production method, hired the famous engineer Cesare Spadaccini, who designed the bronze machine that did this work. 17. Thomas Twining opens the first tea house for ladies in London. 1718. Sandwich, John Montague, 4th Earl of Montaugier, born November 3, 1718, d. A British politician, John Montague, 4th Earl of Sandwich, Empress of 30, 1792, was a leading member of Lord North's administration during the American Revolution. His butler, Cook, is credited with the invention of the sandwich. 1723. The first glasswork to specialize in bottles for wine is set up Bordeaux, France by an Irishman. It was not until 1866 that the shape and size of the bottles for Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Macon are legally defined. 1725, Giovanni Giacomo was born in Venice, died at Dux, Bohemia in 1798. A gastronome of his time, he sometimes went to great lengths and travels to taste certain foods, better known by his pseudonym of Casanova. 1729, a literary, Epicurean, and gastronomic society founded in Paris by Piron, Gallet, Collet, and Crébillon the Younger at Le Caveau on the Rue Bussy, a famous restaurant at the time where they were dining. A society that remained in one form or another until around 1834-1736. Parliament passes the Gin Act to discourage public drunkenness in England. 1740. Venice issues a license to Paolo Adami, so he may open the first pasta factory. 1742. Swedish astronomer Anders Celsius invents the Celsius scale for temperature. The Franklin stove, invented by Benjamin Franklin in 1742, was made of cast iron, originally with a partially open front, and was designed to fit into a fireplace. It radiated more heat and burned less fuel than an ordinary fireplace, and was widely used for heating. The first American cookbook is published in Virginia, entitled The Complete Housewife. 1748. The first recorded instance of cooling is credited to William Cullen at the University of Glasgow, who in 1748 evaporated ethyl ether under subatmospheric pressure to produce refrigeration. His process was successful but non-continuous, and never advanced much beyond the laboratory stage. 1751. The Worcester Royal Porcelain Company is founded in England. 1754. French chef Antoine Beauvillier is born in Paris, died in 1817. Beauvillier is credited with having the first real restaurant in Paris. In 1814 he wrote L'Art de Cuisiner, and also collaborated with Carême en la cuisine ordinaire. Jean-Jacques Regis de Cambaceres was born in Montpellier, died Paris, 1824. 1755, Jean-Anthelme Brillat Savarin, born April 1st, d. February 2, 1826, gourmet and first philosopher of the kitchen. He was the author of La Physiologie du Goût, 1825, a treatise on the fine art of gastronomy. Published in English as The Physiology of Taste, 1825, it was the first work to treat dining as a form of art and gastronomy as the intelligent knowledge of whatever concerns man's nourishment. 1757, Jean-Joseph Clos, born Dieuze, Moselle, France, died 1828, Strasbourg. While extremely debatable that he actually invented foie gras, his name is nevertheless synonymous with it. After being the chef to the Maréchal de Comtade, governor of Alsace for a number of years, Clos stayed behind when his master left Strasbourg. Clos married the widow of a pastry chef and opened a shop to sell his creation pâté à la Comtades, foie gras wrapped in a thin veal farce encased in a pastry, resulting in the first production center of Alsatian foie gras, 1788. 1759. It is maintained that chaudfroid was created in this year by the chef of the Marshal of Luxembourg at the Château de Montmorency, and that it was the Marshal that gave it its name.